Hey, what is going on, Dave? How are you doing today, man?
Dr. Joe, how the heck are you doing, sir? It's been a while.
I know it seems like a long time, but it's only been a week, so to speak. So,
Long weeks.
yeah, long week. Um, but I just wanted to jump on our podcast today and do something different for our listeners and viewers. So, me and Dave have been talking, and we realized um, this episode is actually going to be called a reflective summary. And what I mean by that is we're going to take a look at the previous 26 episodes that we have produced so far, because we really started to think, we've been throwing a ton of information at you, and we're just trying to, you know, thinking about, well, what do they do with that? What do our viewers and listeners do with that to this point? I mean, we've thrown out a ton of information, but have we given them time to maybe take a look at it and how they can apply it? So today, again, we're going to talk about a reflective summary in reference to all of the 26 topics that we've discussed to this point. So now that I've introduced this topic, I'm going to hand it off to Dave to see where he takes us, to see how we get started on this.
Thanks, Joe. And that's all I have to say. So back to you.
Dave, come on, man. I was going to feed off of you.
Yeah, this is a very interesting topic, and Joe and I kind of mulled it over for quite a bit of time before we started this podcast because, to Joe's point, we've talked about many different topics, and we're thinking, what does this mean to our viewers and listeners? What are we hoping that they're going to glean from this and hope to do with it? And then we started thinking, well, what are we going to do with what we've done, right? What are we going to
Right.
do with these topics we've talked about? What is our next step? What is the next step for our viewers and listeners? So we really have quite a bit to explore in this short segment, and it's going to be kind of interesting to see where it goes because there is a lot of information, a lot of topics we've conveyed. Joe and I have pontificated over what's our next step. Do we write a book? Well,
Right.
what would that
Right.
book look like? Do we take all of our podcasts and transcribe them? Because that's fun to do on our weekends. You know, I mean, there's so many different options that we could do. I mean, so yeah, this is a great time to kind of warm things up and figure out, what do we do? What do our listeners do? What do our viewers do with 26 topics or 25 topics? And we've talked about a wide range of things. I'm looking at the list over here. We've got
Yeah.
education and self-reflection. We've got overthinking stuff. Well, we didn't say stuff the first time we said it, but I think we're going with it. um, Starting a business, writing a book, taking action, celebration, and the journey itself and the first steps. I mean, we've talked about a lot of different things. Motivation,
Right.
and we start tying all these things together. We've talked about how these things are all intertwined, and they really create kind of this web of information and things to think about and ponder. So what do we do when we start assimilating these topics? And that's what we're here to talk about, is assimilating and creating a larger summarization on how these topics interweave and create, instead of just threads, an actual fabric that we can utilize in our present and future journeys and tasks and opportunities that we have. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we're thinking about this topic. What do we do? What do they do? What do our people do with this?
Right. And so, Dave, like you said, we talked about this briefly before we started, more than briefly, but before we started the podcast. But to your point, and what we've talked about through this entire journey so far is, and you said it, how these things are all intertwined, and mostly, almost just about every week, we bring back a previous topic because they are so closely related in regards to getting to the next level. So
Mm.
Dave's right. These some of these are seem kind of odd, but if you really look at them, they still are relevant. So like he said, I think one of the ones he said was like starting a business. um you know and is that really in line with what are you passionate about? Yeah, actually, that is in line with what are you passionate about. But career transitioning,
I'm not
public
passionate about starting
speaking.
my own business, but I'm going to do it.
So yeah, some of these may seem out of order, but if you go back and listen to those previous episodes, you'll see that how they, we went back and referenced a prior episode or something else, like self-reflection should be just about in every one of these. With that
Yeah.
should always be a common theme, because anything you do still takes that piece of where you need to analyze it, take a look at it. How does it, you know, what should you do from that point? Where should you go? So it's always that self-reflection piece again, whether it's, going back to school, whether it's trying to position your career. All those things still have to be considered during that self-reflection piece. So yeah, we just wanted to take a pause and not throw out any more information out there to maybe confuse you or overwhelm you. But yeah, I think this is a good point where we kind of just reflect on this, all the topics we've done to this point, and just really look at how they do interchange or interact with one another, and then start to make your plans and goals and things like that. But again, just taking some time to look at everything that we've offered. Like Dave said, these are a lot of topics that we've thrown out there. And even before we started the podcast, he talked about lessons. And so just imagine like a book. He mentioned a book, but if you had a book in front of you and you had all these lessons in front of you, when do you take time to actually practice them or get better at them? So that's what we kind of thought about this episode, as being that kind of pause, maybe align how all these things work together for you. It still comes down to you, because right now we're not giving you a blueprint, follow A to Z, go 1 through 26 episodes and you're going to get there. No, this is still your blueprint. This is still your journey. But we just want to give you a pause and time to go ahead and take a look at those topics and see, how they all align together, or if there's some that don't matter to you or are irrelevant. But we thought this would be a good time to really take a look at those.
Yeah, and Joe, you bring up a good point, because you mentioned, the writing a book or starting a business. Until to a lot of people that may not even resonate. They may be
Right,
like,
right,
"Wow, I'm content with what I'm doing. I'm a house husband or housewife raising the kids, with a
right,
flipped kind of household, or maybe I'm satisfied with my career, and I
right,
don't understand the relevance of a book, writing a book, why that would be
right.
important to me,
Yep.
or starting a business. I have no desire to do that." And when you really look at those particular two in their essence, they're just projects at
Right,
their core.
right,
They're just at the simplest level, they are just projects. And really, you can really put that perspective, overlay that perspective or that lens on just about anything that we do as a project of some form. It could be an
right,
extremely complex project, like designing a rocket to get to the moon, or it
right,
could be a very simple project like making a box of mac and cheese,
right,
or making toast or boiling water. I mean, that's about as simple as you get, is boiling water,
right.
water, pot, heat, right? So
Dave, that is a very good comparison. For people that have done project management before, and I never really looked at it in those terms. But you're right. Everything we do is some type of project, and the better you get at managing your projects, the easier it gets at trying to figure out goal setting. I mean, goal setting is basically a project. You have timelines, and you have to do this by this date or by this time. Then your next objective. So I along the lines, I've done it, but I hadn't never really thought of it in that terms, because it's just, I guess, so natural. But you're right, it is considered a project, no different than studying for a test, right? In school, same thing. You got a timeline. So my test is on July 31st. I need to know this material by this date. I need to be really good at it by this date. So you're right. And again, we do it every day, but just never really thought of it that way. But you're right. That's exactly what it is. We're all project doing project management to some form of fashion.
Yeah, yeah. And another perspective or lens we could overlay this is, we've created or talked about many different tools in a toolbox.
Right.
And I believe in one of our episodes, I may have alluded to, and if not, then that's okay. You'll hear it for the first time. And if I did, then I guess you can fast forward through this part. But, I remember one time I like to do DIY stuff around the house. I like to do a little bit of tile once in a while, not so much now that I'm a little bit older. It's starting to resonate in my bones and joints. But in my younger days, I enjoyed doing a lot more DIY type stuff around the house. And I remember at a house that we used to have, we had a breakfast bar in the kitchen, and I used to call it, we used to call it, refer to it as our crap collector, because it was too high to sit in a stool, because it'd be like your plate's like right here at your like,
Right.
neckline or your collarbone. It's like you don't need a knife or a fork. You just need a spoon, because you're just shoveling at that point. And we
Right.
decided, well, what if we were to just remove that breakfast bar? And I tried one type of saw and that didn't work, and I tried another type of saw and that didn't work. I tried electric and battery operated and handheld, and finally, and I'm not proud at this moment, I got the chainsaw out. Now, the chainsaw was very effective at removing that breakfast bar. Let me tell you, folks, extremely quick. It was seconds. The downside to that, it was basically a bull in a china shop. It got the job done, but there was a lot of cleanup to be done, months worth of
Right.
cleanup, because
Yeah.
the sheetrock that made up most of the breakfast bar permeated every nook, cranny, crack, crevice you could imagine. We had plates that we didn't know were cracked until we saw the dust settle in them. I don't, it's
Right.
just, it permeated everything. And so when we start looking at this list of items that we've talked about,
Hmm.
you may not need or even want to
Right.
utilize
Yeah.
all those tools. Some of them may not be appropriate, like a chainsaw in the kitchen. Not that you don't learn how to do things better with that, because you do. There's lessons to be learned, as Joe mentioned. What kind of lessons can we learn? But it really helps us to reflect on, which tools do we use in a given circumstance? Which tools would be better than another? Do we really need 5 hammers and 12 saws, or will a screwdriver work? And how many different types of vehicles and boats and that sort of thing do we need in our lives? Do we need 12 houses, or is taking one vacation good enough? So I mean, it gives us that opportunity to understand how these pieces and parts can interact, and how some of them can be more effective when you start integrating them, kind of like 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 anymore, because of the synergistic effect of multiplying the outcomes, how the multiplied outcomes are greater than just the sum.
Right.
And
Right.
that's where the beauty of these tools start coming into play. Is we talked about celebrating and potential, and having no regrets. Why are those things important? And those are just random topics I'm looking at off to the side over here. Networking and passion, how do those things play? Are we utilizing those tools? Have we considered the pros and cons to each one of those tools, and how they could potentially positively or negatively impact what we're trying to achieve at that
So,
particular moment for that project?
and so, Dave, you brought up a very good point. As far as getting all these tools in your toolbox, but then using the proper tool when you need it, and
Right.
that any type of training that I've received over the years, that's really the way I approach it. I take in all this information and knowledge, and then I categorize it, because I may not need that tool that I got today until 2 years from now, but at least it's still categorized, and it's still in that, in my bank of tools that I can use. And so like you said, people may not be interested in some of the things that we threw out there today or even tomorrow, but down the road, as they're, creating their path, going down their journey, maybe those things will come back to them and say, "Oh yeah, Dr. Dave, Joe talked about that," and so that's what it's all about. Is again disregarding those things that you don't need, or putting them aside until a later date, which is totally fine. But today's point, maybe looking at those things that do matter to you, and then seeing how maybe they do interact or overlap with some of the things that we have covered. That's the important piece. I always tell people that, when they ask me, hey, what's your favorite book and things like that, and for me, I'm more of a direct. I use more of a direct approach when I'm seeking knowledge and information. I don't read a whole book on um, a certain style of leadership, per se. For an example, I may go in there and grab bits and pieces of that to gain enough knowledge that I can kind of form my own, interpretation or opinion of that information. So same thing here, same rule applies here. We've thrown out a ton of information, but take the parts and pieces that are relevant to you. We don't expect everybody to listen to all 26 of these episodes and then, within a week or two or 6 months from now, start to apply everything on this list, because again, not everything is going to apply to you. It's still all about you on your journey,
Yeah.
and what's relevant for you. And
And,
so,
and Joe, you mentioned a couple of things. You said interpretation and perspective. And I know we've talked about, excuse me, perspective in the past, but I think it's important, to your point, that we have these tools in our toolbox, and again, to your point, I've said that like 4 times in a row probably. We've got these tools in our toolbox, and maybe we don't need them today or tomorrow, but maybe down the
right,
road it'd be nice to have that
right,
chainsaw. Maybe that nail file is good for doing a little bit of taking off the burrs and filing something nice and smooth, but are you really going to want to use that file to chop down a branch on a tree?
right, right,
That's where you bring the chainsaw out. But then
right,
again, that chainsaw, you're not going to want to do some fine movements. Well, I
right.
guess if
Yeah.
you're perspective, unless you're doing like ice art or wood
Well,
art,
there you
that,
go.
I mean, it just depends. I mean, so these tools that we've provided and these topics that we've talked about do have a purpose.
Right,
It's just, to Joe's point, you might not use all 25 of them tomorrow. You may use one tomorrow and three 2 weeks from now. And then as you start utilizing these tools and thinking about their different uses, like networking, what are the different uses of networking? And as Joe and I have taught college courses in the past, we've been trainers in the past and instructors, and it's like, you think networking, what does it have to do with training? Well, I don't know at the moment, but if you give me a couple of minutes, I could probably start describing how networking is important, such as
hmm,
knowing who to reach out to, who might need
exactly,
training, or
absolutely,
what institutions are going to appreciate and find value in what I have to
right,
communicate and with our areas of expertise, and who won't. If they say they need a calculus instructor, I'm going to be the first one to raise my hand and say, thanks, but no thanks.
right,
Not the area I want to talk about,
right,
so these tools are valuable in the right context, with the right perspective, with the correct interpretation as it applies to that particular project or moment in time.
right, right. And to me, what's been really not funny, but just almost coincidental is, sometimes some of these things that I've learned over the years, and I'm sitting in a meeting or in some environment where it gets brought up again. And so kind of like you said, Dave, you may not need it today, tomorrow, but down the road, maybe in your toolbox, where you can reflect on it, or you can respond because you do know something about it, or you are familiar with it. And that's what I find comforting in a lot of situations, is the fact that I don't know everything, but I know a lot about a lot of things.
Right.
Because of that, I welcome all those tools into my toolbox. And again, sometimes it clutters your toolbox because you have so much stuff in there. But at the same time, in a lot of cases, I'm not in the dark, totally in the
Right.
dark, because I do have a wide enough bandwidth of information in there that I can tap into. And so that's what I've always been really appreciative of, that I've learned so much, and then I'm able to maybe tap into my information bank when I need it. So that's kind of what this is. I know, again, sometimes it may seem overwhelming, but in that moment, you may be in a position where somebody, like you said, somebody says something about networking, and we've kind of touched on it here. Now you might be able to, think back. Oh yeah, I remember when Dr. Dave and Dr. Joe talked about networking and some of the benefits of it and how I can, improve it, or what, whatever our topics or whatever the things we talked about. But just having this information in your mind, maybe it's in a, back end of your mind or all the way deep hidden. But a lot of times if it's addressed, you're probably going to be able to respond, or be able to interject because you have at least heard about it, or took it to heart, or took taking notes on it, whatever it is. So I agree with Dave. A lot of these things may not be relevant today or tomorrow, or even if, like in Dave's situation or his example, using that chainsaw, maybe not the best tool for the application, but he learned some different things by using that in that situation. And so you may be in a similar boat where you may not have the exact tool you need, but you may be able to compile a couple of tools, or maybe connect them together and get your outcome that you desire. So that's kind of what this is too, is, again, take a look at that list of items that we've covered, and or shows, or episodes you listen to or watch, and then reflect on those again that are relevant to whatever your situation is. So today we talked about education as our number one topic. Today you may not be thinking about education, but in 6 months or a year.
Or think about education in the same way.
Right, right.
And you've mentioned a lot of several times reflecting
Right.
and being reflective. And with that, I want to add in that we all have our own inherent biases from, positive and negative events that we've encountered and
Right.
been through in our lives. And that can maybe direct us to or away from a certain tool.
Right.
Like, I've
Yeah.
tried that networking tool and it didn't work. Well, maybe in that particular paradigm or situation, it didn't work, but that doesn't mean
Right.
that tool is not useful in the future. Or when you reflect and you think, oh man, I could have used that tool about time by yourself or time for yourself. That would have really helped me out in that circumstance. Well, now that you've had that moment of self-actualization and realization, you'll be more aware and susceptible to utilize that tool in the future when another similar type event comes up, and
Right.
it might work well. Like, just because the chainsaw in the kitchen wasn't the most desirable outcome doesn't mean I'm going to say, well, I'm never using a chainsaw again because they're messy. There
Right.
may be times that chainsaw may be very critical and it doesn't matter what type of mess it
Right.
makes
Right.
because it's irrelevant.
Right. Yep.
Like, if there's wood chips on the ground in my grass, that's not a big deal. I got that
Right.
branch out of the way from falling on the house. So yeah, I mean, these tools do have purposes and applications. It's just like we've been saying, you may not use all 25 or 26 of them right now in this moment. It'd be
Well,
kind of
well,
challenging to do that, actually.
right. Well, and I still just like the approach that, you have these tools and you may have to
Yeah.
bend them your
Customize them a
own.
little bit, tailor them a
Exactly.
little bit.
That's a good word. Customize them to your needs. That's what this is all about. Again, is to just provide you, because these are me and Dave's examples, or
Yeah.
our experiences. So everything that we've talked about, you may have experienced everything on here, but in a different way,
Yeah.
relating to whatever your situation was. So by no means are we saying this is the book. Again, I said it before, this is not the blueprint for
Yeah.
you. These are just options, suggestions, just more tools for you to utilize when needed,
And to think about
or
and to
to
contemplate and
customize.
consider or customize. Yeah.
Right. Just because, again, like I said before, before we got on the podcast, Dave, we were talking about uh, something along this line, but it was more in, me when I wrote my first book. It was One Approach to Effective Leadership. And the way I was able to write that book was because I took all of my prior experiences as a supervisor, as a dad, as a son, as a brother, and that's how I created my approach to effective leadership, because I took all those things, my experiences, things I had read about leadership, things that I learned, and then I applied my perspective to my approach. And so that's really, again, what we're asking you to do here, is to take a look at that list, and you may look at every one of those topics and say, none of these are relevant for me, and that's okay. But what you down the road, again, we've said this before, a couple of times, that down the road you may pop up and say, you know what, I do remember that now, or we did talk about life, being a lifelong learner, or something along that line. So that's what we're just want to take a pause to, again, have you do a little self-reflection. And that's why this is called a reflective summary, is because we just wanted you, again, to take a look at that list, and just see how that applies to you, and just store it in your memory bank or in your toolkit, so that if down the road, if you don't need it today, that maybe you might need it down the road. And so that's why I view things. I always take it as I can always learn something, and then even if I don't go out and apply it tomorrow, I still learned it, and it's still going to be back there. And again, I'll be able to recall it at a later date. So that's
Yeah.
what we're hoping we, have allowed you to do, or assisted you with, is to take a look at those topics, and again, take the ones that are really relevant to you, and just, like I say, take your time and go through the ones that you want, push this, discard the ones you don't want, or put them aside. This is your journey. This is your blueprint on, how things are going to help you get to the next level. So I'll stop right now, and I'll let Dave go ahead and jump in there if you
Yeah.
had any other things.
Yeah. As we wind down and kind of wrap things up, the part I want to touch on is, Joe and I might use this exact same tool, but completely different. Joe might take it apart and make it look like a tree, and I might make it look like a house, and that's okay.
Right.
Because we each have our different styles and levels of comfortableness. That's a mouthful this early in the morning.
Right.
On the tools that we use. I mean, someone might be much more comfortable using a big hammer to do some very intricate work, and other
Yeah.
people might use the exact same hammer for something completely different, like
Right.
maybe taking down a wall.
Right.
So it could be
Right.
used in an artistic mean, or it can be used in a constructively destructive way. That's completely necessary, and that's okay. And to Joe's point, and our point for this topic is, we have these tools, and if you look at them, they do create a fabric, that it's not just one thread that you put on your arm, and then this piece of thread you put on your leg, and there's no warmth there. You can integrate many of these tools to create a
Right.
fabric that you can use in different ways. You can make a pillowcase out of it. You can make a couch out of it. There are so many different ways you can use these tools and integrate them into your daily lives. Not necessarily all of them at the same time, but they're useful. And if you don't use them today, again, I feel like I'm parroting Joe. If you don't use them today, you may use them in the future, or you may
Right.
not.
Right.
If your job is laying concrete, you may not have a need to use a garden rake,
Right.
or a leaf rake. There may not be a purpose for that anywhere in what you do, and that's okay. But at least you're aware of that tool exists, and that, maybe in the future there is a way that you can use it, or maybe not. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, with that, thanks for that, Dave. Like you said, we kind of reiterated over and over again the fact that, you may not use these tools, and that's okay, but it's still your choice. And like I say, this is your journey, along with our journey. So, however you choose to use those tools or not use those tools, that's still all up to you. Like I said, we're here just to provide as much as we can, and then your interpretation of that or perception of that is still up to you. Because at the end of the day, this is your journey. We're just glad that you're coming along with us, so that we can share in this journey. So with that, I just want to thank you for tuning in to this episode of, just kind of reflecting on everything we've covered to this point. So until next time, you continue being your not so ordinary you.